Welcome to Microscope, a series of in-depth, critical, comprehensive, and informative conversations about issues that really matter in community. No scripts, no written questions, minimal or no editing. This is what journalism does best. Join me, Steve Betchkel, as we sit down and get down to the matter at hand. Give me a bibliography of your work.
Yeah, sure. Well, my name is BJ Hollars. I've written a few books now, mostly nonfiction. So my first book was 13 Loops, Race, Violence, and the Last Lynching in America. It started out as my graduate thesis, and I just wanted to kind of look at one particular instance of injustice. In this case, it was a lynching that took place in 1981, and that really kind of got me interested in civil rights issues. So we started there. I had a collection of stories called Sightings. Have another civil rights book called Opening the Doors about George Wallace's stay in the schoolhouse door. Very odd book, kind of in the style of Wisconsin Death Trip, called Dispatches from the Drownings, kind of pairing these very bizarre drowning reports from the region alongside these really unique photographs. An essay collection called This Is Only a Test. A couple edited collections, and then more recently From the Mouths of Dogs, What Our Pets Teach Us About Life, Death, and Being Human, and Flock Together. A book about extinct birds in particular.
Okay, so how many books is it total?
Geez, I have the shelf here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 out, 3 of which have been edited, and 1 more on the way.
And how old are you?
33.
So one of the things that impressed me most about you is your work ethic. All right, so I want you to tell me then, in an average week, I mean, you're a full-time college instructor, you're a professor.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. How many... You got a family, you got 2 kids.
Yep.
Okay. How many hours on average do you get to write a week? Or do you write?
Yeah. I try not to think about it because it might depress me because that number continues to dwindle. But, I mean, certainly every day I'm grateful to have time. And a lot of times it's early in the morning. Sometimes it's 6 to 8, sometimes 6 to 9. Sometimes I try to cram all my teaching into, 3 or 4 days a week to kind of really leave time, and the other days to just power through complicated subjects. And so any day I would say a minimum of 3 hours of writing related activity, whether that's new writing or research or even just writing postcards to friends and relatives and that sort of thing. Just about 3 hours of activity every day.
And that's the truest sign of writing discipline, isn't it? I mean, really sitting down and writing. I mean, you show that. You walk the walk and talk and walk the walk, in other words. I mean, really.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I would never think like I'm, the best writer around or anything like that, but I do work pretty hard, and I think that's sort of always been with me, even in high school. I remember being the first guy to show up in high school. I parked the car right next to the janitor and the biology teacher, and the 3 of us would roam the building for about 2 hours before anyone else even got there. And I've kind of just tried to utilize that idea in my writing.
And now, it seems to me, just looking at you, you have a couple projects going kind of almost at once or overlapping a lot of times.
Yeah. Irons in the fire, and I tell my students that too. The writing business is so strange and so disappointing quite often that the more irons you can have in the fire, the more chance you'll have at success. If you buy 1 lottery ticket, it might not work out. If you buy 10, there's a slightly better odd. So I think of writing that way too, and so sometimes I'm working on an essay at the same time I'm working on a book review, at the same time I'm working on a larger nonfiction project. More recently, I've kind of gone back to this young adult fictional project that was in fact based off of the research I've done for a nonfiction book related to civil rights. So there's ways you can kind of utilize information in different ways, in different contexts, and that's been good too.
Okay, so let's talk about the idea generation. How does it work for you? How do you get ideas? How do you rate them? How do you know they're good?
Yeah. I mean, what people often ask, where do these ideas come from? Why do you write about what you write about? And I think the most honest answer to that is I write about things that freak me out, things that keep me up at night, things that I don't have answers to, but I really want to know more about. And so in the case of Flock Together, I was just getting really concerned about environmental ideas. And so the birds seemed like a great avenue to figure out what we've lost and keep losing. Related to civil rights, same situation. And, here I am writing a book about 1960s civil rights and the Klan and all of that. And then, more recently I turn on the news and see Charlottesville and I see, wow, this stuff is still happening. And so that fear has really encouraged me to redouble my efforts in a current project. And so I think that's where the ideas come from. Sometimes you stumble upon a historical marker and you think, who was that person? Or sometimes you come across a footnote in a book or in an archive, or just some letter that you come across in an antique store. So I think there are a lot of avenues for creativity and a lot of ways to find a story. I always just tell my students, everyone's got one. You just have to figure out what is the best way to tell it.
Is part of the measure of whether or not you like it, it's fun to research, it's fun to write? How do you rank it? Because obviously you wouldn't want to hate the job either.
Right, and what's funny is by the time you're done with the project, you kind of do hate the job, and I think that's a good test of I'm done here, because I can't stand to look at one more book about birds right now, But before you end up getting to that point, you love it deeply, and you become so passionate about it. And so when I do look back at some of the books I've written recently, I have a real nostalgia for that time in my life, and I think, that was sort of the dog book era in my life, and this is the bird book era in my life. And so a story I tell, which is true, and I think it kind of speaks to how deep down you go into the rabbit hole, is when I was working on my first book, which was then my thesis, 13 Loops. I can't remember a single class I taught all year. I can't remember a TV show I watched. Can't remember any activities we did. It's bizarre. What I remember of that year is like the lights off, late at night, the glow of my computer screen as I'm reading these redacted FBI reports on this murder that took place, and it's kind of a dark way to spend a year, but at the same time, I think that was just my sole pursuit. I don't go quite that deep anymore, certainly. I remember what I'm teaching, I know the students' names, I really care about their projects at least as much as my own these days, but nonetheless, I think that idea of, wow, 6 months can kind of vanish in the blink of an eye if you do go down those rabbit holes.
Mm-hmm. Do monsters freak you out?
Monsters freak me out, but it's not just the monsters, but kind of why we believe in them sometimes, why we believe in these strange things in our world. And so a more recent project I'm working on related to that is tentatively titled, I'm sure it'll change, Embrace the Strange, Monsters, Martians, and Finding the Truth in the Weird. And so this was inspired less about any individual monster or creature or phenomenon, but more about why people are very willing to believe things that have very little evidence behind them, and I think the whole fake news phenomenon really woke me up too. And I see how often students turn in papers with sources that are just not credible sources at all, and yet it persuaded college-level students that this must be true. I think so often if we see it on the internet, if we see it on a TV channel we trust, we'll just kind of go with it without ever going much deeper than that. And I'm guilty of that too. But this whole book is an opportunity to look very critically at very out there situations and phenomenon, and then trying to figure out, well, what are the other possibilities here? And why is this person willing to invest 10 years of his life on this particular UFO sighting? What truths can be gleaned from that, not just about the event, but about the type of person who's willing to go that deep.
So you are not only going to get to the bottom of Sasquatch and UFOs, but you're investigating how people think about these kind of almost supernatural things, or myths or legends, or phenomena that are hard to prove. So both things are happening.
Both things are happening. I'm not sure I can guarantee any definitive conclusions on the Bigfoot front or any of the fronts, really. I mean, one thing I've really found is that so much of it depends on the person across from you, and where they come from, why they believe what they do, kind of where their background is, where their biases might be. And so anytime people say to me, look, I'm not selling anything. You can believe me or not, and either way is perfectly fine with me. I tend to trust those people a lot more, because they really aren't trying to sell me on much of anything. I contacted them. They perhaps didn't want to talk to begin with. After a bit more pressure, they agreed to. And so when those are the situations, I find maybe what they're talking about isn't necessarily true in the world, but it's true to them. And that too is really interesting to me. The trickiest part for this project has been how to be open-minded enough to take them seriously and to not ever be dismissive or disrespectful of any claim, whatever it is, because if it's true to them, it's true to them. And who am I, someone who wasn't there to witness it firsthand, to say otherwise?
So what I hear you saying is twofold. One is that you're not writing fiction, so you need a good character. You need somebody who is willing to talk and tell you a story. But the other is you're a good listener now. You're really paying attention to what people are saying, and you're trying to digest that and put it on the page and explain how they're thinking.
Yeah, you summed it up. And it's tricky because, again, it would be very easy to kind of sell people out, especially in these subjects. this crazy person saw an alien, this crazy person saw a Bigfoot. But that's not what I'm interested in doing. You know, I mean, those books have been written, I guess, but at the same time, I feel like I do put my own credibility into question when I don't do that. And so, as many people I've talked to have warned me, you know, when a scholar, when a person in academia tries to even investigate such strange happenings, it doesn't always end well, you know. And those pieces of advice have really been eye-opening and a bit scary to think about. I really am trying to keep a safe distance, or the safest distance I can, and say I'm interested in the phenomenon itself, not of what they saw or didn't see, but why they think they might have. And so that's really opened up a lot of, frankly, new friendships, you know, and that's been the real joy of writing nonfiction, is you get to stay in touch with people, and you get to run into them at the farmer's market or at the dog park. Sometimes you get a postcard or an email, or sometimes you see them on the nightly news. You know, it's been really rewarding for me to have relationships with people that I would have never known otherwise.
Do you have solid confidence in your muse? You ever afraid you're going to run out of ideas, or is it just like, I will never run out of ideas, there's always something out there?
Well, I feel like the way to jinx this is to say, no, never. So I'll temper that by saying it's always sort of there. I mean, right now it seems endless. The world is so wide, and there are so many people in it, and there's so many things that scare me that you put those three things together, there's going to be a story there, you know. But I think for me, it's more a question of motivation, you know, and am I willing to miss, you know, my child's soccer game to do this interview, or, you know, if I have to grade these 40 papers tonight, or have the chance to get to the bottom of this particular interest that I'm working on, you know, how do you make those choices? And so as I've grown as a writer, I've often kind of grown away from my own writing. And a lot of what I do now is actually trying to find ways to support fellow writers. Most recently through the formation of the Chippewa Valley Writers Guild and the accompanying summer residencies. And that's been rewarding in an entirely different way, you know. And again, a lot more friendships, a lot more fellowship, a lot more connections with people, which is at odds with what a lot of writers do, which is you get your butt in a chair in a room and you close the door and you have at it. And that's vital too. I wouldn't want to do one or the other. But I have found that being more social in my attempts to contribute to the success of other writers has only benefited me too. It's been very symbiotic, but also made it a lot more fun along the way.
Okay, that's the muse working. You got this idea to do this Chippewa Valley Writers Guild. Where'd that come from? Just one night you woke up and you said, hey, Meredith, I know. How'd that happen?
You know, I'd been getting emails for a couple years of, hello, I'm so-and-so in the community. I'd like you to read this novel for me, or I'd like to start a writer's group. I don't know how, or can you put me in touch with some folks who could help me with this? And after a while, the well kind of ran dry, and I wasn't in a position to read all these books for folks, and I didn't quite know where to send them. And so I thought, what if we just created a little directory online? Here are the writers groups in town. Here's what these specialize in. Here's if they're open to new members or not, just to get some kind of list. That quickly changed dramatically, and now there's a little portal related to that. But most of what we do now is about providing high-impact educational opportunities, most of which are free. And so that means monthly craft talks and a pretty robust newsletter and a lot of open reads and kind of cross-pollination with the Chippewa Valley Book Festival and other groups around town. So that's been one major component, but I think probably the biggest component has to be the summer residencies. And currently we're running a really great spot called Saranaika out in Fall Creek, Wisconsin, 43 acres kind of away from it all. And you get writers from all over, Portland, Oregon, St. Louis, Missouri, Washington State, Michigan, Minnesota, all over, you know. And it's been really cool to see these folks come and really build it for me. You know, they've been the ones who've contributed the most because they took a chance on a fledgling organization and really enjoyed themselves and came back for a second summer. So that for me is perhaps the most rewarding of the entire experience, is being able to pair 10 awesome, highly motivated writers from all over the country alongside a highly motivated writer in residence, throw in a great chef on site and some awesome helpers, and you just have a really cool experience that allows creativity to thrive.
Mm-hmm. So it's packed, waiting list kind of numbers?
I mean, first summer we sold out, second summer we sold out. Maybe one or two spots left over that first summer. And so now we're at a point where, do we expand our offerings? Do we try to do more? Frankly, I don't think I'm in a position to do more. It's just, if you're not careful, it'll take over the whole summer, you know, and as primarily a volunteer. I have to be mindful of that balancing act we already kind of talked about. When do I get to sit my butt in a chair in a room and do my own work? When do I get to kind of refocus my attention on the more important things, family and all of that? So right now we're doing about 5 summer residencies, a winter residency at the Oxbow Hotel, and we're thinking about maybe a spring or a fall we might throw in on occasion. So 6 or so a year is plenty. Over the past 2 years, I think we've already had well over $33,000 worth of economic impact in the region, which is super exciting. I get emails from folks in Madison now, what's going on in Eau Claire? Your literary scene is blowing up, and it's really neat to see how it was always here, but when you bring more attention to it, suddenly other people take notice, and I think it just grows from there.
Mm-hmm. There's people love stories, and I think they're irresistible. I think you do too. Yeah. But they also have stories. People have their stories, and they want to write. I think I've heard so many people say, "Yeah, I got this idea for a book," or "I'm going to write a book," and they never do.
Yep.
And that yet, I think all of us are wannabe authors inside.
Yep.
We would like to have our story out there. I got to ask this question first. Mm-hmm. You mentioned you're pulling back a little bit from the writing a little bit because you got a family. Your schedule and your pace could be the recipe for divorce.
Yeah.
I mean, it's broken up marriages. You have. My wife jokes with me, mm-hmm. Well, how's your other wife doing? You're going to go see your other wife. Yeah. I mean, but when you're committed as a writer, as an artist, mm-hmm. you want to go on a book tour. You got to do a book tour, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. You brought your son with you on it. Which is a genius way to do it.
Yeah.
But you are balancing this act, and so what does your wife think of how you do it? Is she supportive of you? Does she say, "All right, I think you should pull back, give me more time here, BJ," yeah. Or is she kind of saying, "Hey, go for it"?
I think what we found about me, and there's probably some kind of mental illness involved in this, is that I'm a better husband, I'm a better father, I'm a better professor, I'm a better dog owner, I'm a better everything when I can wake early in the morning and get my art done first. And if I can find a way to make that happen, which again is becoming harder and harder, maybe you're just a little more tired than usual this morning, maybe you'd want to go for a bike ride, maybe the gym is really calling you, all great things you should probably be doing also. And some days I pursue those instead, but if I can get that in first, I'm just better at everything. I think of in high school, I was on the swim team for like a year, and 5:30 a.m., freezing cold drive across town, jump in the pool for an hour. But when you were done with that, the rest of the day felt awesome, And so for me, that's how writing is. If I can find a way to get that in early, then if I get up early enough, I can still walk the kids to school. I can still be there to, do the breakfast dishes. I can still be involved in all the familial activities. While also having a chance to kind of do what's important for me to be the person I want to be.
Okay, there's that work ethic again. Mm-hmm. That 5:30 swim team, getting up earlier, right? Yeah, that's a good balance. And so you love writing, but you're not putting it aside for family. I mean, you're not sacrificing anything.
It's funny. My wife was just telling me last night I should read the lyrics of that Cat Stevens song, "Cat's in the Cradle." And the lyrics are very clear about sure. The dad saying, "Oh, we'll see you later. Oh, well, I'm doing this right now. I'll come back." I never read them till last night. It was kind of a wake up call of, oh my gosh, Little Boy Blue and the Man on the Moon. I better rethink all of this. Because the last thing I want is to look back on my life and say, wow, there's a bunch of my books on the shelf. That's it. That's always going to be secondary. And as you mentioned, taking my son on the book tour with me this summer, it was by far the highlight of the summer. What's great too is it was a book tour / research tour. So I was also knocking on doors, getting some information for the next book, and he was right there alongside me. And it changes the dynamic, but people are a lot less willing to slam the door on your face when you got a 5-year-old next to you too, So that he can be a part of that and kind of bear witness to that, and then have his take on it too. What did you think of that guy? What did you think about what he told us in there? It felt like I had a great sidekick the whole time, And so I guess my fear is when my children get too old to think it's fun to go on these book tours or would rather not or hang out with their friends instead, then I'll have to come up with a new plan. But for now, any chance to go to a hotel in some small town in Wisconsin and swim in the pool and go try out a new restaurant and get cable TV, that's still worth it for them, And if I can benefit off of that leverage as long as I can, then that seems like a worthy pursuit.
I'm driving towards the idea of identity, who you are, and so I'm going to ask this obnoxious question.
Yeah.
If you were to list who you are, where does writer fit? Obviously, you're not going to say number one. You're a writer first because you're a dad. You're a husband. But where does it rate in your identity? Where does writer fit?
Gosh, that's a great question. I used to have on my Twitter website or something. It used to say writer, teacher, dog walker, and then I started having children. So now I think maybe the dog walker's been put aside. She still gets walked, but not as many as she probably wants. I really do think of myself professionally as a writer/teacher, not necessarily in that order. The teaching makes me a better writer, the writing makes me a better teacher, and I really like to tell students about the ups and the downs. Who else got 5 rejections today? Anyone? Just me? Well, I got my 5, so I'm carrying the weight for everyone in this room today, and those are bummer moments, but I think students appreciate that kind of candor of saying, wow, that's the guy in the front of the room, and he's having a rough time writing too, so it's cool. It's okay if I'm struggling too, and so I really like using my struggles, the interview I can't get, the interview that didn't go well, how I'm fighting through a very technical chapter, I can't quite figure out how to crack the code. I think students like hearing about those stories because hopefully, eventually, maybe by term's end even, I'll have an answer to those questions. And that way it feels like a reciprocal arrangement. They're sharing their struggles with me on the page, I'm sharing mine with them, and we all kind of support each other. So I guess to go back to your question, I don't know how I'd rank it exactly, but I think of teacher/writer as almost kind of linked. I don't want to do one without the other for any length of time, just because again, just being a person in a room by yourself, you're missing out on everything you perhaps could be writing about, all the experiences that would perhaps make a better book, but more importantly, make you live the life you want. And so writing isn't the top priority, but it is the part of my life that makes me feel like I'm accomplishing something every single day professionally. Some days you have a bad day in the classroom, you think, I'm not sure anyone learned anything in there. But some days they're the best days when you do feel like you've managed to impress upon something to someone. And writing, as frustrating as it can be, even getting a couple lines down, even finding that perfect fact you were looking for, even going through all these piles of paper over here to find that's the quote, that always feels like a small victory.
Mm-hmm. I don't know a lot about you as a person, but what I do know about you, you are innately and organically modest. You are a very modest person. And yet, a writer, I believe, one of the things about writing is, it seems to me that writing is a cry to be acknowledged. It's the author saying, see me, here I am, here's my voice. Mm-hmm. And so that's antithetical. There's nothing modest about wanting your work to go out there, really, but yet, and then you've got to promote it. You've got to be a promoter of it too, and so you can't afford to be. You've got to be somebody who can talk about your book and your work, and you're good at that too. You're very eloquent at speaking as you are at writing. But does that ever feel like a conflict to you? Your private life, but you write all these thoughts and feelings in the word, and then you got to sell those words, and you got to sell yourself as a writer.
Yeah, I hate that part of it, and I feel like my online persona is often a version of me that I don't particularly like myself. Hey, excited to share this new essay. Hey, very thrilled to have been honored, and blah blah blah, and I feel like I'm sending out press releases to people who don't even particularly care. I feel like it's just part of the anti-modesty machine, which is social media. So I'm trying to really be more mindful of that and trying to always find, do you kind of temper it with self-deprecation? Do you just ignore it altogether? Do you kind of limit what you do, post once a week, no more? What's the protocol to kind of accomplish all of these things? Signing out of Facebook, even if it's just for a week at a time, has been useful for me. Every study in the world has shown when you do that, you're happier. You don't have to compare yourself to everyone else. You don't have to be a part of that comparison either. It's always kind of hilarious/frustrating when you spend 6 months on an essay. All right, here we go. I'm going to share it. 3 people like it. You post a picture of your dog. 1,000 people like it. I'm like, that's just a dog. I spent 6 months of my life pondering this, pining over it, and then finding the right way to put the words down. And sometimes those flash in the pans vanish before you even know it. So yeah, I think there's a real interesting intersection between that self-promotion and trying to be heard, but also trying to be a writer who just wants to do the writing. It's hurt me too, because when I try to get an agent for my nonfiction books, None of the agents have ever really had a problem with the book or the project. It's always with the platform. How many Twitter followers do you have again? Do you write for the New York Times? And if the answer to both of those is not 100 and no, then they give you a quick thanks but no thanks. Keep working on building your platform. And I just don't want to build a platform. I'd rather build a book, and I guess that's just part of the business too. But there's a lot of ways those stories can play out, and you never know what's going to be the viral piece that gets you at all. You never know what small thing you've written might actually really impact a lot of people. It's funny that when I think back on some of my books, the people you hear from, I remember getting a letter from Walter Mondale's brother out of the blue, really wanting to talk about the book. I remember getting a call from Attorney General Eric Holder's wife, whose youngest sister was featured in, or eldest, one of her sisters was featured in Opening the Door. She was Vivian Malone, who integrated the University of Alabama. And so when you get a call from someone like that, who says, "Hey, would you want to meet up? I'd like to say hi. Do I want to hang out with Eric Holder's wife?" Yeah, that would be fantastic. You just never know who's reading. And so it's really cool when you get those personal touches. The last kind of story related to that, I guess, is when it comes from a stranger. Writing the civil rights books haven't made me a lot of friends with the Klan and folks who are perhaps against some of the things I'm trying to perpetuate related to social justice. And so I remember someone sent me this big package from rural Alabama, and I think someone joked, "Uh-oh, hope there's not anthrax in there or something." And I opened it up kind of cautiously. What is this odd package from a stranger in Alabama? And it was a woman who wanted me to sign a couple copies of the book, and then it had like a 6-page handwritten letter about her experiences with race in Alabama. And it was so touching that someone had taken the time to not only read my account of what happened, but then to share hers. And I think back to those moments, and those have just been some of the most rewarding moments as a writer.
Mm-hmm. So some people might believe that the objective to writing is to sell books.
That's a novel thought.
But we all know that we worry about that after the fact. We write because we love to write, right? And so how do you balance that when you've got 9 books, you're still teaching at the university, you can't retire, you're living in a modest home, a nice home, but you're not rich from writing.
Nope.
How do you balance that out? That kind of perspective that you love writing. Mm-hmm. If it sells, is that that's great. You're rooting for it to sell, but what if it doesn't? Mm-hmm. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, and I've had plenty of examples when it hasn't sold terribly well. Probably 9 examples of it, but that's never really stopped me, because every day when I am writing, I'm feeling good, and I'm feeling like that's one more lesson I can instill in my students. That's one more bit of knowledge I can share with at least a small portion of the world. And you never know what's coming next, and you never know whose heart you might touch. And so for me, well, I wouldn't mind the big paycheck, but also quality of readership is worth something too. And when you have I was at a conference recently, and a woman came over and was like, "Oh, you're BJ Hollars," and shook my hand and goes, "I read this essay of yours from some literary magazine, and I'm a farmer, and I keep it with me on the tractor, and I reread that essay every time I'm on that tractor." And it was just out of the blue. Do you have the right person? You must be thinking of any other writer in the world. And so I am so backward in how I do things, and that I often write an entire book without any idea who may or may not publish it, without any pre-contract signatures being signed, without any agent representing it from the start. I do my best to write a great book, and I go from there. And certainly when that doesn't work, it'll break your heart, but on the times it does, you feel like, wow, I had a chance to do it my way, and we found a way to thread those needles. So probably not great advice for budding writers, but I do think writing what you care deeply about, what keeps you up at night, is good advice.
Sometimes I think that, I mentioned earlier, everybody wants to be an author. A lot of us read, we enjoy reading, but words, I think, are cheap. And you value words. Mm-hmm. You value them greatly. Mm-hmm. You see them as a friend, a tool, a livelihood, an expression of self. But I think, I'm going to throw this out there, maybe it's me the elitist saying this, but people don't value words like you do. Mm-hmm. I don't think the general public does. I think that they might think writing is easy. Mm-hmm. They read a sentence, they might not know how elegantly it's crafted. Mm-hmm. They might not know a good sentence from a bad sentence. Mm-hmm. They do know, in the end, they like the story.
Right.
They'll finish the book.
Right.
But, you teach people writing. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the value of the word out in American culture?
Yeah, I mean, all the work is invisible. I mean, in the end, maybe someone can tangibly hold a tangible book, and that's not invisible, but very few readers, I think, take the time to say, okay, now let's look at this sentence. How is it crafted? What are the million other ways it might have been crafted? Why did he incorporate this quote? Why this description? I mean, all that work is kind of thankless. But if it helps the reader turn those pages, then it's not thankless. I think in terms of words, people value the soundbite, and they value the graphic novelization version or the film version or the audio version or the podcast. And so, which is not to diminish the power of words, but just to say words can be utilized in a lot of ways. In case in point right now, I've been really interested in experimenting with podcasts recently, and so I have this little recorder. I brought it with me today when my son was off to kindergarten first day, and just kind of recording that. I brought it with us on our little book tour earlier this summer. We went to a Minnesota Twins game, and just recording that experience in the bus ride home and walking back from the university at 1 a.m. back to our house and that conversation. And you're right, that has a lot of power to it. I think if you want to really touch someone's heart, the actual voices of the people, the actual visual images of the people are a great way to do that. And so the trick for a writer is to find a way to try to reach hearts in the same fashion in a different form, words on a page, which is a tougher sell. But I think it's how you organize it, it's the details you intend to use and how you use them that can at least give you a fighting chance. And I guess I've kind of made peace with the fact that a lot of people probably won't appreciate the work that goes into it, but for me, they don't have to appreciate the work. I'd rather them appreciate the book. And I'm perfectly happy doing that work if it will lead them to a good reading experience that hopefully encourages them to think differently about the world around them.
That's interesting to me, though, because the writer writes without hope of selling, writes without hope that people will understand the sentence, the hard work that's put in it, writes without people even recognizing the name or knowing the book is out there. Mm-hmm. We do all these things in this confidence, in good faith, that the art will, in the end, be the thing that blossoms because we did it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not because anybody's out there saying, oh my God, when is BJ Hollars' next book? Yeah. I'm waiting on it. And there probably are people that are doing that.
My mom and my dad. Yeah.
But all authors live in that kind of world of faith that they say, boy, I'm going to do this because I love it. And then they kind of put it out there and then they say, well, so be it. I mean, people are reading it, they're not reading it. I'm going to go on to the next one because this is what I love to do. Yep. Who are your mentors? Who do you model your writing after anybody? Did anybody inspire you the way you write? Do you think of them when you write?
Yeah. In terms of mentors, favorite authors and those sorts of things, I don't think I intend to write like a lot of those folks. I kind of appreciate those books and those authors on their own merits. But one person who is in fact a pretty well-known author who inspired me a lot, mainly by way of his passion as opposed to his subject matter, is Ray Bradbury, who we have behind us here. And I mean, the short version of this story is, I wrote this essay contest as a high schooler about who changed America, name an American who changed America, and everyone wrote George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. I wrote Ray Bradbury. I just learned about Bradbury. He was blowing my mind. I wrote this essay, sent it into the contest, forgot all about it, and then won the contest. It's almost embarrassing, but I think I've made more money off of this one contest as a junior in high school than any advance I've ever received, at least, from a book. Went on to blow a lot of that on travel, but it was totally worth it, and the better part of that story is what happened next, which was Ray Bradbury got a copy of the essay from the contest folks, picked up the phone, called me on the phone. I lied to him. I said, I know I'm in the area. I'd love to shake your hand. He said, come on over. That was about 2,000 to 3,000 miles away in Indiana. So a couple months later, I indeed did come on over, took a plane, a train, a bus, a van, knocked on his door. And we had our friendship until his death, over a decade. And we traded letters regularly. He called me the son he never had, kissed me on the cheek. And I visited him one last time before his passing when I was dropping my brother off to become a film guy in LA. I was in the middle of the desert filling up for gas, and I thought, do I bother him? I hate to bug him. I just called him like, hey, I'm kind of in the area for real this time, and I don't know if I even told him who I was. He just said, oh, come on over, click. And I get to the door, and his daughter answers and goes, oh, thank God it's you. Dad's inviting everyone over these days. And so it wasn't that I was special perhaps, but I was someone who really valued his time and everything he'd done. And so again, he hasn't inspired what I write, but he inspires how I write, which is with passion, with zest and gusto is his phrase, and that was actually the title of the essay. With zest and gusto, the world was saved, and I think I've really taken that to heart. If you live your life with so much enthusiasm and passion and excited for what comes next, I mean, that can really fuel a person. And I think I saw him do that for decades, and I've been trying to try that same theory.
In a second, I'm going to ask you if there's anything you want to add. But first of all, I want to ask you this. The story of your life. How would you want to be remembered?
Yeah, that's the question. And it's something I think about a lot when I'm writing about other people's lives. Is this fair? What if this person you're writing about was someone you knew personally? What if that was your brother? And it's really impacted kind of how I write about other people, trying to be empathetic of these stories in some ways. Am I telling the full story or just one small slice of the story? So I guess thinking of, those future biographers out there watching this tape who want to make sure they, do right by the BJ Hollars story. I mean, I guess I would appreciate if they could hit on not any kind of necessarily focusing on the talent involved. I don't know if I have a lot of talent, but certainly the work ethic, as you mentioned earlier. For better or worse, I'm driven to write, and it doesn't always reward you terribly well, but it feels good when you do it. And again, it makes me a better human when I do it. And I like to think by preserving these stories of other people in particular, people who might otherwise have been entirely forgotten about, that is a service in some ways. And you never know, as I've learned in the archive, who will be reading after you're gone. And so when I come across, some old journal from the 1920s, I think probably no one's touched this in 50 years, and yet for me this is very meaningful. And I'd like to think I could leave enough trails and clues behind that maybe someone else will find some use in what I've tried to do with this life and use it in ways that they see fit.
Do ghosts freak you out?
I'm sure they could if I had experienced one.
Do you believe in ghosts?
For as much as I write about these things, I rarely face those questions myself. I guess I'm very interested in the stories related to them and why people do. I have never seen one myself, but as a former camp counselor, I know many a ghost story, and I know many a camper that has wet the bed as a result of those ghost stories, so certainly they have an impact on our world in one way or the other.
The reason I ask is I don't believe in ghosts at all. I don't believe they're out there, but I believe the word lives on. I believe that when you write, that's an extension of yourself. Bradbury was a person who wrote about the future, and so I don't see him in your writing. Again, that's kind of revelatory to me. But if you write, you are making a commitment to the future. You're saying that I believe these words will live on after me. They are of more permanence than I am. I believe that about any author. They believe that about themselves. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's true. And maybe it is part of that. Life after death mentality, when I'm gone, my children can know me for who they knew me as, but also maybe they'll discover the books they hadn't read before. Maybe they'll say, hey, that's me. I remember I was with Dad that day in Rhinelander when we were researching the Hode, and so, I think it's sort of in some ways a selfish pursuit too, for all the work that goes into it. It's not heroic, it's fun, and it pays itself off in a lot of ways, most of all just in the enjoyment of the craft and getting better at it and the challenge of it. I wouldn't do it if it was easy. I forget what Sir Edmund Hillary said about climbing Mount Everest, but it had something to do with it was the hardest thing I could think of to do. And while writing a book is not the hardest thing one person can do, it's awful hard for me. And that's how I know I'm becoming a writer, is that it's not easy. Whenever I see younger writers, oftentimes students who are in the intro class, and that was easy. I wrote a poem in like 5 minutes. I ask, but are you a writer now? I mean, is perhaps the struggle is the part you missed there? And I think the quality often comes with that struggle.
Mm-hmm. What's the next Writers Guild workshop coming up?
Yeah, we've got a lot of good stuff. We're currently kind of planning for next summer's residencies, but we're also doing a winter residency at the Oxbow. So we haven't officially announced some of our poets and writers coming, but they're coming from all over. A lot of them have connections with this region, which makes it even easier to lure them back. And it's becoming easier and easier. Frankly, people are hearing more about Eau Claire, more about the Chippewa Valley. And people want to be a part of what they're seeing and hearing about in Madison and Minneapolis and all over. So it's been fun to kind of use that card as I entice readers from beyond the region to come check us out and see what we're all about.
Is there still room in that workshop?
It hasn't even opened yet, so there will be 20 spots ready to go.
And they can sign up on your website.
cvwritersguild.org.
Okay. Anything else you want to add on this topic about writing, your perspective on it, your joy in writing, anything at all?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the parting thought is, as someone who writes a lot and thinks a lot about what writing means for students, I rarely take the time to sit down in this kind of setting to really reflect deeply about why I do it and what it means for me and what I hope people get from it. So yeah, it was kind of rewarding to take a moment away from the keys just to try to talk about what I'm trying to do with those keys.
Fun talking shop with you, BJ.
That was a blast. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you for joining us today for Microscope. We've got more on many great topics. Look for us online at www.cvctv.org.